especially when there is such big animosity between the two regarding what is happening in Syria, regarding Bashar al-Assad, when we know that Turkey is not interested on keeping Bashar al-Assad. Russia is actually aiding Bashar al-Assad. But we saw some kind of, let's say, the Russians are taking back the stand of protecting Bashar al-Assad in a case of, or in a case if something will happen, maybe the United States was involved in that. Where, except of paying any concern like Barack Obama is doing, what is the part of the United States in all this?
Well, as we know, there is, as you said, there is a very clear disagreement between Russia and Turkey over the fate of Bashar al-Assad. That does not justify, obviously, shutting down an airplane. I mean, I think what the Turks did is really very foolish. They probably felt that because they're members of NATO, they could afford to do that. But obviously, Barack Obama, is not going to support this kind of behavior. Just because they're a member of NATO, it doesn't mean that they can count on U.S. support for this kind of foolish acts. Last point. The Turks claimed that the Russians violated their airspace, but as a matter of fact, this happened over a disputed territory, the Hatay, what the Turks called the Hatay, and which the Syrians called the Alexandretta. So it reminds us, by the way, that this small piece of territory is controlled by Turkey since 1939, but the Syrians never recognized Turkey's sovereignty over that disputed territory.
I want to ask you both, when you don't have a plan, let's say, let's say one very built, good plan about how to fight IS. Who is against who? What to do with Syria? At the end of the day, you might find like this, two countries who should not clash with each other because the enemy that the entire world is facing right now is ISIS. And nobody has any concern about Russia or Turkey. Everybody's concerned about ISIS. So,
I mean, you're 100% correct. It's extremely unfortunate that something...
The enemy that the entire world is facing right now is ISIS. And nobody has any concern about Russia or Turkey. Everybody's concerned about ISIS. So,
I mean, you're 100% correct. It's extremely unfortunate that something like this has happened because, well, the Turks, and this is a completely different conversation, are allegedly on the side of fighting against Islamic State. But as your reporter mentioned, it is questionable because there are reports that their borders are open, that behind the scenes they are actually aiding, training and supplying weapons to the extremist groups. I want to make one point, though, just vis-a-vis what you were saying about NATO. Turkey has called for an emergency NATO meeting. What is interesting is that they did not contact Russia. They've gone the route of calling for a NATO meeting, suggesting that they don't want to confront Russia. Also, because they are a long-standing member of NATO, it is expected that they're going to have the support of NATO and that we're probably not going to see any kind of confrontation between NATO and Russia over this. But the Russians are really angry, as you can well imagine. The Russians are outraged, and I, for the last few hours, have been talking to people both in Syria and in Russia, and Putin's support ratings at the moment stand at 88% in terms of popularity at home and what he is doing in Syria. And that popularity is going to remain after this incident, particularly as Russians confront the very real question of just how much aid is Turkey giving to the very people that the Russian planes are bombing.
Yeah, we'll just say that Tayyip Erdogan is just giving a press conference or a statement to the people regarding the specific issue. We will, of course, wait for the translation, and then we will give the specific details of what he is saying. But, I'm asking myself, him having such big support, 88% you're saying, this gives him the power maybe to say, you know what, I'm going all in. I am going to attack Turkey, and I'm going to reiterate, and I'm going to just...
The Russians are conducting the airstrikes because they really are afraid of extremism. If you geographically, the Middle East is very close to Russia, so they're worried about that extremism moving across the border. The reports also suggest that there are up to 7,000 Russian nationals that are fighting inside Syria and Iraq with Islamic State, and a large proportion of them come from Chechnya. So the Russian president's also worried about homegrown terrorism, about those people coming back. I don't think he needs the support of the Russians to conduct the airstrikes. I think he knows very well that by conducting the airstrikes, he is addressing a very real fear that Russians have, and that is Islamic extremism.
Mr. Navon?
Yeah, I do not see Putin really, attacking Turkey to retaliate about what happened, because at the end of the day, Turkey is a member of NATO, and Article 5 of the NATO Charter says that, an attack on one member is considered as an attack on all the members, and Putin knows that, of course. But he's definitely going to retaliate, and I think his biggest leverage is economic. Your report mentioned before the fact that Turkey imports about 2/3 of its natural gas from Russia. And that means that Russia has a huge leverage on Turkey, and I assume, it's very reasonable to assume, that Russia is going to retaliate, mostly economically.
Economically.
But also, I think also within Syria, because, as you mentioned, Turkey has been playing a very ambiguous game with regard to the Islamic State, letting the extremists go through Turkey, via Turkey to Europe, letting the European Islamists join the Islamic State via Turkey, and he's been playing a very ambiguous game.
And what about the accusations of Turkey actually playing to the hands of the Islamic States and buying oil and buying things and basically making this organization richer? Isn't this putting, let's say, Turkey in the position that it doesn't want to be specifically right now? So
the reason why Erdogan has been playing this very ambiguous game with regard to the Islamic State is one of the reasons is that he benefits from it. For example, when about a month, 2 months ago, the German Chancellor flew to Ankara to ask him to please stop the influx of refugees, it just gives him enormous power vis-a-vis the Europeans. Yes. Now, the problem is that he has this very ambiguous policy, and he's a member of NATO. And I think that the Americans are getting pretty annoyed at this policy and at his attitude.
And he just won the elections, and he is also gaining his popularity back. So this puts him in a